Welcome and thanks for taking valuable time out of your day to come and visit with us today and hear the story of RavenQuest Biomed. We're going to go through the full experience of what we've been up to for the last 18 or 19 months. A little bit about myself before we get started. I actually got into the cannabis space in a very unusual way. I was running a private consulting company doing security work in the physical, electronic, and cybersecurity world. I was working for the federal government, provincial governments, and many of the regulated industries such as healthcare, oil and gas, utilities, and corrections, to name just a few. The cannabis space in 2013 changed its regulation in Canada. We called it the Medical Marijuana Purposes Regulation. In that, all the licensed producers needed to have a high level of security built into their facilities. Many of them, going through that whole security process, couldn't get it approved by Health Canada and couldn't get their license to sell and or cultivate cannabis. I guess I was recommended from someone in some office somewhere to come and help the early companies out. And I entered into that space to try and help them. Many of my clients, like the federal government, provincial governments, wasn't totally interested at the beginning for me to start to work in the cannabis space. But over a very short time, they understood that this was a legal product now in Canada for medicinal use. We started working with some of the very earliest companies in the security side, but the consulting arm very quickly built in my company to the point that we had specialists in building design, climate control, growing and cultivating of cannabis, quality control, and writing standard operating procedures so the facilities could be audited by Health Canada through its inspectors and auditors. We had 4 companies at that time. Then coming into about 2017, we looked at ourselves as a company and said, why don't we actually start cultivating cannabis rather than just supporting companies by helping them fix problems in their businesses? We actually are starting to understand it, in some cases, maybe better than they were. And in 2017, in October, we started RavenQuest Biomed as a publicly traded company. The first transaction, other than bringing my own private companies into that publicly traded company, we acquired one of my clients, Alberta Green Biotech. And that was the genesis of RavenQuest Biomed. So our experience and our background is actually being some of the leading experts in cannabis right across the country, and then got into the publicly traded company and then started cultivating cannabis and building our own facilities. Absolutely, today you're going to hear some forward-looking statements. We want to tell you as much as we possibly can, and those statements could be and will be forward-looking. The revolution has begun. If we remember back to the days of gold, we used to pan for gold. Remember, we used to do lists years ago? If we would have stayed there, I don't think we would be today at any of the metals business. We applied science and innovation to those metal markets to find better ways to get product out of the ground more efficiently and more effectively. What I want to talk to you today about is the opportunity where we're going to show you different ways of cultivating cannabis that sort of brings that same sort of energy and science and innovation to the cannabis space. We're going to start talking about the evolution of cannabis in the world. Before we get into the deep dive into anything, we want to talk about some of the investment highlights that may be of interest to you and draw you into the conversation today. First and foremost, we already have finished building out 2 facilities that have annualized production rates of 11,000 kilograms per year. One facility is in Markham, Ontario, just north of Toronto in Canada, and the other one is in Edmonton, Alberta, on the west coast, or closer to the west coast, but a little bit more north. Second of all, we've entered into a joint venture agreement with a company in Holland that will start cultivating cannabis in Portugal. And I want to talk about that and how interesting that arrangement is. Actually, for 2019, we're very lucky. We have a huge sales force on our team, absolutely massive. It's one person. The reason why? People have come to us to purchase our cannabis off of us. We haven't had to go and sell it. Because of the innovation, because of the science background, people come to us to find out what you're doing and how can we buy your cannabis. As we take a look at our management team that runs the company, in many companies, but not all, there are senior executives that come from different avenues. They come from the alcohol, or maybe the tobacco, or maybe the marketing world or branding world. Our company and our senior management team all have extensive experience in some aspect of the cannabis space. Building buildings, designing climate control systems, cultivating cannabis, inspection and audit background, security background. We are a company built for the cannabis space, and we think that's extremely different. But obviously, we've created a central management structure in our company. Our two facilities that actually cultivate cannabis, for example, the one in Markham, Ontario, that's a 20,000 square feet, or let's call it 2,000 square meter facility. As a standalone company, that building would have about 30 people working in it. Because we centralized our management services, Markham, Ontario has 8 employees. If it needs help with accounting, if it needs help with marketing, if it needs help with building or changing out a component in the building, our management team is then deployed when required and only when required. Thus, this keeps our operational costs down in each one of those operating units that we have. We have a very diversified business model. We still maintain our consulting business even though we are cultivating and selling cannabis. We actually still have about 79 clients inside the cannabis space in Canada, and that consulting experience is now exiting Canada and now entering into the areas of Europe and other areas within this side of the continents. All our whole management team, believe it or not, is actually billable. We're still all consultants, so we still go out and do work, and including myself. I go out and I'm billable about 20 to 25% of my time, as I expect all of my senior management team. That way we create diversified revenue streams and the least amount of cash burn in the company. We're going to show you today some of the most leading edge cultivation processes that are there, that are also create the most stable quality product at the lowest cost that we have seen yet today. Finally, on our investment highlights, we actually do everything through science. In fact, we have a partner, McGill University. You might know the name. It's in Montreal, Quebec, in Canada. It's a top 30 university in the world that has great specialties, but one of the most important areas for us is the area of plant sciences. We worked with them over the last 3 years, even before we were publicly traded. My private companies was investing in scientific research. We actually started writing grant programs. In Canada, the next closest and largest grant that we have heard to ours is $98,000 over a 3-year period. Because of our fundamental design and how we're doing our research, we received a $1.6 million grant. Remembering that the closest to us, as we understand, is $98,000. This is the excellence of the work we have in our research. Everything that I'm talking to you today about will be academically backed up by research by McGill University. We're going to talk a little bit more about what we're doing with McGill a little later on. We have 4 pillars of our business. My background before starting my own consulting company, I worked with Allied Signal and Honeywell and Tyco. These are Fortune 100 companies. They taught me or beat into me, I'm not sure which one of those things it was, but they taught me to create a business plan very clearly, create your pillars of your business, and stay in your swim lane. Do not get distracted. Some companies we have seen in the cannabis space, when someone announces an agreement down in South America, the next 5 or 6 press releases from other companies is them chasing the herd down into South America. You will never find that from our company. Our swim lanes are as listed here, the services division, where we have Benil Sable leads that group, a wonderful woman with probably 25 years experience in cannabis and in hemp, takes care of all the compliancy and all of the services division. Next, we have the investment division. This is in fact where we actually grow cannabis and sell cannabis in the company. Next, we have Indigenous people. This is a very important part of the Canadian economy. Our First Nations, Inuit, and Métis have very special rights, up to and including UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. They're allowed to ship when the receiving country has medicinal cannabis, cannabis from Canada to them without federal oversight. But more importantly, Indigenous communities on their sovereign land will not be taxed on any of the cannabis produced or any of the buildings that we put up on their lands. We're going to talk a bit about how we work with Indigenous communities just a bit later. And lastly, leading our research and development is Dr. Simranjeet Kaur. This is a lovely woman who actually graduated her master's degree in India. Still today in northern India and Pakistan, she has created 2 rice varietals through ancient breeding processes that are now the most widely cultivated rices in those regions. Not through GMO, not through any manipulation of the gene structure, other than breeding into the plant with other varietals of rice, disease resistance, and allowing it to bear more fruit or more rice per plant. A wonderful woman who guides our company on all the plant health side. We stay in those swim lanes and we'll never leave those swim lanes. We do a lot of things very differently in the cannabis space. We've actually 3 years ago started working with a wonderful German company out of Oberstaufen down in Bavaria, Harder Drying Solutions. This is a very wonderful family-based company for over 25 years, as I understand it, has been drying plant material for pharmaceutical drugs. In the cannabis space, I want to do something different on the drying space. The best numbers that we have today, that once you've cultivated cannabis, in a normal way, like panning for gold, in the old ways, you hang dry your cannabis or put it in a room to sort of dry the cannabis, but you're putting moisture-laden air on moist product. As that plant dries, the outside dries, the inside is still wet, and that can create mold. As we understand it, 30% of the harvests that are coming off today in Canada are now producing mold because the drying process is not very efficient. I've seen this happening. Remember, I was a consultant. I've been in over 40 facilities in Canada helping clients. We are starting to see some of these issues that were occurring. In fact, I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of the cannabis production world. I knew drying was going to be a problem. So 3 years ago, we started working with Harder, and we developed a product now that's specialized for the cannabis space that allows you to dry the cannabis. Instead of 7 to 10 days hanging it, it dries it now in 30 hours. But while it's drying it, it's putting 100% dry air onto the plant material, taking all the moisture out of the airflow as you draw the moisture out of the plant material and reintroducing 100% dry air. This way we can eliminate the possibility of mold in our plant material. But it's very different, it's very innovative. But it does 2 things. Not necessarily does it only take out the mold, but now if we can dry it in 30 hours, we can get the product and material out for sale much quicker than 7 to 10 days. You're starting to see a little bit of our plant material just hidden beside that stuff on the left-hand side of that image. When we start talking about specifics now about the growing process, it's interesting that I want to talk about many points here. Many people who've grown cannabis still today sort of work with the plant in the same manner. We decided to fully automate the building control system that manages the environment that the plant grows in and fully automated the growing environment. So we know exactly what's happening within the growing environment, and we pull data every 30 seconds so we have historical reference points to see where all our successes are coming from. Second of all, in 64 square feet or approximately 6.4 square meters, we get 500 square feet or 50 square meters of growing space. We're not growing in flat tables, we're using the cubic square footage of the room and leveraging that room size to make sure that we can keep the capital expenditure low, but get the highest yield possible out of each and every single room that we grow in. We started very early in designing RavenQuest. We decided to have an ES&G program, Environmental, Sustainability, and Governance program. We already knew back then that this was going to be incredibly important as the cannabis space moved worldwide. So in that, we decided that we had to find ways that we could impact Mother Earth the least amount as possible. In that, we created a growing system that uses 65% less power in equivalent yield than any other growing technology that's out there. Number 2, we actually use 90% less nutrients. Although those big bushy cannabis plants that you may have seen on images on TV or in magazines or on the internet, although they look very lovely, most of the time when you harvest the plant, you cut 90% of all that leaf structure and you throw it away, even though you've put water, nutrients, and light and power into that plant material. We wanted to do something different. In our growing process, as you see in the picture on the right, the plants naturally stunt themselves at 14 inches, largely because they've gotten as close to the light as they need to get. A plant's first goal in life is try and get as closest to light as possible so it can convert the light energy into photosynthesis so it can generate energy within the plant. Lastly, we decided to have a zero water waste program in our facility. Every time we feed the plants, we don't drip that to waste and off into the water system outside of our facility. We actually recollect that water, put more water into the reservoir, pH balance the water, and add the nutrients that the plant has been asking for. So we actually look at all those nutrients and we actually give it back what it needs. That wastewater program further extends out to our climate control system. As you're trying to manage humidity in a room, you strip some humidity out. That creates a water flow through the condensation. We actually recapture all that water and reuse it in our facility. We have firmly decided to have a zero wastewater idea to our business. And more importantly, everything is precision controlled. The whole environment of which the plant is exposed to is in that canopy that's going to be rolling around that light structure, which we'll show you in a minute. So all we have to do is control that area of the climate for the plants. Imagine if you were on a flat table. Imagine on your table itself there was plants growing. To get a very precision controlled environment, I'd have to control from the ceiling to the floor and all the stratification of temperatures. I'd have to control all of that through a climate control system. Inside the gardens, we're only doing that within each one of the drums. Let's talk a little bit more about what we can do in this area. You're starting to hear a little bit about cannabis now being talked about as cannabis as an ingredient. I'm a little bit envious. You're out enjoying some very good wine, which I will do later. But as far as I know, you can't make good wine from a bad grape. Not today, I can't see that. And I have never seen anyone turn hamburger meat into a superb ribeye steak. As far as I know, it takes a good ingredient to make a great end product. It's our belief at RavenQuest that if you have a good flower or a good plant material, you can make anything else thereafter. So what does that mean to simplify that down? Cannabis as an ingredient, as some people are talking about in the industry, would be like taking one component out of the plant. So let's call that orange flavored crystals. You take vitamin C, you take some sugar, you take that, you scoop 2 scoops into a container, you stir it up, and you drink it. It tastes like orange juice. But is it orange juice? I don't think so. I think what we want to do in RavenQuest is create a flower material that we can actually extract all of the plant material out of it and provide it to the humans that want to use it for medicinal purposes. And why I want to do it in that manner, in your body, everyone in this room, we have an endocannabinoid system. It's got 2 receptors, CB1 and CB2. They're both looking for THC and CBD to turn on and open the door to your body to bring all of the other parts of the plant material through your body to help it either heal, remove anxiety, stress, or pressure, or any type of pressure you may have on your body. So if you take a look at that, the cannabis plant is perfectly made for the human body. It has cannabinoids. We have an endocannabinoid system. Believe it or not, as you sit here today, although it's in very small levels, your body is creating cannabinoids. So if we take a look at this regime here, we want to make sure that we can extract everything from the plant material, give it back to you in however you want to consume cannabis, but give you back the full plant material just like fresh squeezed orange juice. Recently, we just made an announcement. We're going to be moving into Portugal. We think Portugal is an extremely good environment relative to the cannabis laws. We've created a joint venture with a Norwegian company. In that, we have 50% of that joint venture for the use of our intellectual property, developing intellectual property, and the use of our technologies that we've created. What's really important about this joint venture is it does not require any cash on our side. In fact, this joint venture, this one development of 2 facilities in Portugal is actually bigger than our current company as we exist right now. If we take a look who our partner is, we start to take a look at a company called Petronor. This is a company in Norway, Petroleum Norway, shortened up. It's led by Gerhard Ludvigsen. What's very interesting about this fella, he's been in the oil and gas industry, but more importantly in the floating LNG business in Norway. They've expanded projects worldwide in Africa and other regions of the world, billions of dollars of projects. But they developed a business model where Petronor actually creates the projects, has feet on the ground in different countries, has made the government connections, and then partners with technology providers that provide an enhancement of the asset that they're working on. They've used that same business model to enter into the cannabis space. But why? They're backed by a sovereign fund that has said that we need to start diversifying our asset base, not get out of oil and gas, not get out of fishing, but what we can do to start making investments into different areas. They decided that cannabis is what they wanted to take a look at next. They ventured out as a company, and for 8-9 months, they looked at all the different companies that were out there. And for one reason and another, they couldn't find anyone that they had the technology, the partnership, or the focus on science and research and innovation to work with them as they worked with other innovation partners in the past. They started to do that research and RavenQuest's name came up. Over a 7 to 8 week time period, we went through due diligence, not only on us, but us on them. And we started to find out that, boy, we had a lot of things that were in common. They had a large scientific research background in what they were doing, so did we. They looked at innovation and technology as the way to move any industry forward, and so did we. But more importantly, when we find partners in other geographical regions, you want to make sure that they have feet on the ground, relationships with the governments, and good people who know how to make sure that they understand the political will, not only of the governing party, but what's happening in the other parties that are out there. They have an extensive political understanding of the regions that we looked at, and now we can partner with them to enter. They're a very good partner for us. So we went out after the due diligence phase. We created a heads of agreement, like a letter of intent. And then we visited with their strategic advisors for the fund, for the Sovereign Wealth Fund. From what I understand and believe, after those meetings, 3 days later, they provided through the fund, through the strategic advisors, to our partners, $100 million US for projects already. We feel that we have an extremely strong partner with us as we look to expand the company and expand our position here into Europe. All of our facilities are built to EU GMP standards. Why? The EU has set the highest standard for cultivation and processing of cannabis. We look forward to that opportunity to start to ship our product, but we make sure that, as you can see on the right-hand side here, that each one of those facilities must be clean, and ours are. Remember, you're dealing with a monoculture environment. When you're dealing with a single plant species, pathogens and diseases love to work their way in there. And we have seen it all over the cannabis space already in Canada with multiple crop failures. For us, we've decided to create a lab-type environment where we can clean and scrub very quickly the building after every cultivation process to make sure we're not exposed to that opportunity of pathogens setting themselves into the business. This is our Markham facility. This facility is now flat table, but turning into Orbital Gardens in the near future, probably starting in July, August, to convert that facility over to our growing technology. This is our Edmonton facility. Looks very different. It's not flat table. It's our Orbital Gardens. We're going to start diving into what that looks like right now. That's currently operating at about 7,000 kilograms annualized. It's a beautiful facility, about 3,500 square meters, but produces 7,000 kilos. It's a factor of 5 relative to any other cultivation facility in Canada per square foot or per square meter. As I said, we've already sold all of our cannabis. We have a partner in Wayland, which is another cannabis company in Canada. They've come to us. They've asked to purchase up to 8,000 kilos. That in itself is a beautiful program where we're able to sell them about $44.5 million of product under the current purchase order. It's nice to know that you have every gram of your product sold. We also have other sales avenues into the retail space, although it's a very small amount of focus for us at this time, into the adult use space into Canada. In Canada, as of October 2018, any adult in Canada is allowed to consume cannabis. It's very unusual that our government understood that people were already consuming cannabis and they decided to legalize it and tax it and make it safe. It's a small focus for us, but we were actually focused on it in Canada. Let's take a look at the gardens and how they work. Inside here, we'll see the plant material a little closer, but there's actually little baby plants in there. They're 5 days old, and we've just put them inside the garden. The gardens actually rotate. We're going to rotate them right now, and you see what happens as they rotate? This is going way too fast, but we needed to show you the speed of what it actually does. The garden would only turn at about 1 time per hour. We don't get into the details of exactly what the speed is because that's some of the intellectual property that we have. Because as you spin the plant, you actually stress it to a point where it'll actually do some very amazing things for you. I'm just going to stop it here so we can take a look at what's happening within that plant material. So if you take a look here, you can see the plants, they're in there. If you look down here at the bottom of the trays, there's actually a feeding tray that contains water and nutrients. As it rotates down, it picks up the water and nutrients twice per 24 hours. The actual plants are in a rock-wool substance. It's like a really spongy stuff. If you've seen pink insulation that you might insulate your house with, it's a higher grade of material used in indoor cultivation around the world for tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers. We're using it inside here. So as it dips through the nutrients, it picks up its nutrient base and its water, and then it feeds it for 12 hours. It goes up and around. But what's interesting, when you start playing with the plant material and you start taking away its sense of gravity, you start to actually get the plant to actually grow very differently. Actually, in the late 70s and early 80s, NASA started experimenting with plant material in space. They wanted to see if they could grow plant materials to sustain time and people while they're in space. If we take a look at how plants react, and that's any plant, but let's take an example of a tree. A tree here on Earth, when it feels gravity, the auxin, which is the hormone of the plant, when it feels gravity, says put 75% of your energy into the root structure. It wants to do that for 2 reasons. Mainly 2 reasons. One is to drive the root structure far enough into the ground so it can pick up nutrients and water. The second reason, so it can put enough root structure in it so it can't fall over in a wind or being bumped. It puts 25% of its energy into what we see above the ground. When you start taking away the sense of gravity, and what NASA found out, the actual change in the auxin does this. It puts 50% of the energy to what's above the substrate, and 50% of the energy what's below the substrate. They started to see that the plants grew far quicker because more energy was going into the green material, and it started to see that the plant was actually delivering a better, larger yielding fruit, or flower in our case. Remember those tiny little plants we showed? Remember we just stuck them in the gardens when it was rotating around? This is now that same plant material 3 days later. 3 days later. This is phenomenal growth. You'll never see this in the old styles of growing. Why it's doing that? Remember I talked about that auxin? It's now putting 50% more energy into that plant structure than it has in the past. In fact, those pictures on the right are plants hanging upside down. You don't see the leaves falling down. They are so strong, the auxin is holding that plant so well put together that now it's actually can grow, won't fall over, won't tip over, but it's growing extremely quickly. Now let's fast forward this same plant material to 21 days in the garden. We grow our gardens, or we put our garden structures together 2 wide and 3 tall. If you take a look over the image on your right, you can actually see, if you look very closely, you're going to see that there's full flower developed on these plants. This is 3-week-old plant in the garden. To get the equivalency of this flower or bud, you would have to be in a position of about 6 to 7 weeks on a flat table environment. So we have rapidly accelerated the growing cycle of the plant without any detriment to the plant at all. Second of all, you can see the plants are very happy. They're getting enough sunlight, they're getting enough nutrients, but you can also see they've already stunted their growth. Plants don't need to grow to be 2 meters tall to actually get great flower. When you also take this plant material and you put it in the garden, it actually focuses on only growing the top bud or the best flower of the plant. Many times you'll see that plant, as I talked about earlier, it has all that extra fan leaf that you're only going to cut off. In this case, the plant will only grow the top flower. So what does that mean? This is our last harvest that we had out of our gardens. These are like little Christmas trees, but these Christmas trees are all just bud or flower. It hasn't had to put its energy into other fan leaf, other smaller buds. It takes and looks at the opportunity of only putting the emphasis on the main flower. If you take a look at the image on your right, that's only a portion of the flower. And I would argue that you would find it difficult to find that size of flower in any other type of growing environment. And this is what it looks like when you harvest it out of one garden. Most cycles of flat-tabled grown plant material will be approximately 12 to 16 weeks. We actually grow our plant material in 8 weeks. What does that mean? Instead of having 4 turns in your building, or 4 cycles of growing, we can have 6 cycles of growing. We increase our production annually by 50%. Number 2, you can see that it only delivers only the top bud, which means that each one of these gardens produce in 8 weeks approximately 3.8 kilograms of dried plant material. What's very interesting about that is we have very little waste that we have to deal with and very little plant handling, so we have a lot less people working in our facility. We also have full brand development done. Our first brand is called Lore. Tell your story. Working off the words of folklore, if you really want to take away a stigma away from anything, we have to start to talk about it. So we decided to use some phrasing and phraseology around the word folklore or lore to make sure everyone felt comfortable about talking about cannabis and their use of cannabis. But more importantly, just recently, and we weren't even able to update this slide, working with our ES&G program, we are now the first company, as we know, in Canada, that instead of using single-use plastic or glass jars, we have now been approved by our regulator, Health Canada, to use a compostable bag. No more use of single-use plastics that have a lifespan in a landfill of 500 years. Our compostable bags will now biodegrade within the environment and contribute back in a much different manner than single-use plastics. Every part of our company is focused on environmental sustainability, and we're governed by those processes. Talking a little bit more about the First Nations communities, we've actually structured up 7 agreements with different First Nation communities. It's very interesting because they use their sovereign land to build the facilities, to grow their cannabis. They are not exposed to the taxes that everyone else in Canada is. This is through agreements they have made. If they establish their own Cannabis Act and legislation on their lands, they can now manage their own tax processes. These communities that we're working with, think about it in terms like a casino. What do I mean by that? We design the building for them. We build the building. We operate it. We use those valued community members to work with us. We have opportunities of taking up to 70% of the revenue and providing 30% of the revenue back to them. But more importantly, from us sitting in the room from the investor side, we have no tax exposure on all the cannabis that's grown in these environments. What does that mean? About a 23 to 25% tax savings, which if anyone knows, if you get that type of tax savings, that's incredibly important. Our research with McGill continues to build out. In fact, as I said early, my private companies were investing into research and development long before we started the publicly traded company. I was actually working with McGill 3 years ago, right up to the reputational board, to make sure that we had full support of the university to start working with plant sciences in the cannabis space. We are lucky enough that the forward-thinking reputational board said, guess what? Cannabis will be a mega trend. Cannabis will be something that will spread worldwide and will be used essentially daily by the human race. They needed to be a part of that research. They wanted to be leaders in this area. Today, I'm very excited to tell you they have 6 faculties that are involved in cannabis research, from law, economics, finance, medicines, pharmacology, toxicology, pediatrics, people who deal with people with PTSD, and also plant sciences. This is the largest group of faculties that have come together to create what they call the Cannabis Research Center of Excellence. I don't know if I'm the catalyst, and I don't know if I should always take a pat on the back, but just recently I was asked to sit on the board of directors of the Cannabis Center of Excellence. So I guess they think that RavenQuest, our focus on our business, is truly based on science and innovation, understanding that we have to manage against the policy or the regulators of the business, but they truly believe our focus is making sure that we make the right decisions moving forward within the cannabis space. And we all have to make a profit, but I think we also have to be, when we're trying to deal with stigma, make sure that we can support everything that we say. If you're interested in your books, there's actually a reference into the first publication that we did with McGill. That first publication went out to the frontier of plant sciences. Maybe you might have heard of the Journal of Medicine. This would be the equivalent in plant sciences. We sent this, what they told us after they had reviewed it for 2.5 months, was the most forward-thinking and leading research in cannabis anywhere that they have seen in the world. So important that we've actually created studies where you as an investor, if you're looking to invest into cannabis, it tells you how to calculate out yield. It tells you exactly what the light structure should be to grow the most appropriate cannabis. But more importantly in there, we embed in all of the thinking that we're doing at RavenQuest is built into that, including the use of beneficial microbes. You know, the world has been using fertilizers for so many years, and it's tearing our soil apart to the point at which soil will just actually blow away in the wind. Starting about 30 years ago, beneficial microbe research started, and McGill led that. Over the last actual 35 years, McGill has raised $50 million in royalties developing beneficial microbes that replace fertilizer. These beneficial microbes stress the plant to actually perform better by helping out with disease resistance and actually creating the plant to have more yield or more fruit, or in our case, more flour. They've already done it in soybean, corn, rice, and cereal grains. They were the natural selection for me to go out and do this. I felt that if we were going to be in the cannabis space, the use of 100% only fertilizers was not going to be beneficial, as we'd have to take from the earth a whole bunch of the base components to use of those fertilizers. I wanted to come up with another way. But you know what's more important for us as a revenue stream in this business? Beneficial microbes today is a $2.88 billion business. The research of this going forward and the use by now major fertilizer companies, this is now by 2026 going to be $11 billion business. That's a CAGR of 16%. I already knew 3 years ago that this is the area that I wanted to get into, not only for the benefit of the plants that I was going to grow, but more importantly, because I felt that if we could use beneficial microbes, we're actually taking less from the earth. We're very excited today that we can tell you that we've identified 3 microbes that are specific for cannabis. We're going now just through the provisional patenting of these 3 microbes. The first one, I'll only tell you we're going to call it K for this meeting. K already has been identified that it actually helps fight off 10 of the most prevalent fungicides or funguses and bacterias that are killing off plant material. 100% kill rate. We're also seeing extreme growth in the root structure and extreme growth in the yield of these plant materials. But we're using beneficial microbes rather than pesticides and herbicides and other types of things. Our whole approach to this business is there must be a different way. But more importantly for everyone in this room, this is now an incredible revenue stream. If we were to capture just 25% of the square meter of space in Canada in the cannabis space, this would be about a $200 million revenue stream. But this product and this IP that we're developing, we can take it worldwide. We're the intellectual rights holder on this. We see this being a huge benefit, not only for us, but for other companies, but also for Mother Nature. I want to tell you how we've divided out the company. Remembering that little story I told you at the beginning where I was actually working in Fortune 100 companies? They taught me very clearly that you hold all your intellectual property now and your future intellectual property in one company, leave it separate from your operating units. So on the left, you see RavenQuest Technologies, Inc. That's where we do all of our cannabis consulting out of. That's where we actually hold all of our intellectual property and future intellectual property. That's where we manufacture and build our gardens. Every one of those gardens, we actually design and manufacture them that you've seen. And this is where we hold all of that IP. But we also have clients that we work with here. Our first acquisition was Alberta Green Biotech. That's that Edmonton facility. I had been working with them since 2014. It was a friendly transaction to bring them over into what you see on the right side of the company, which is RQB Capital Corp. That's where we actually grow cannabis. So there's natural deal flow that we work with clients from the left over to the right. And as we expand our consulting services into Europe, we see this as an also ever-expanding opportunity to continue to move our company and acquire when appropriate. If you look on the left-hand side, we actually have control of 46,000 kilograms of cannabis for sale by 2021. Even at a very conservative number of €5 per gram, that's a very low number for what actually is being sold here in Germany and in other jurisdictions. But let's just use €5 per gram. That's over a $200 million revenue stream. We're very excited by the way we've shaped this company and the way we've done it, because we've done it off of we've actually done it off of innovation, and we've actually done it off of scientific research. This is what the growth of our cannabis cultivation looks like over the next couple of years. At the very bottom of the gray, that's our facility in Markham, Ontario, just north of Toronto. The red just above that is now the acceleration of cannabis production in our Edmonton facility. Both of those were recently fully licensed in April of this year. That's why you're seeing that inflection point of growth. Then you see our first phase of cannabis production in Portugal, and then our second phase of cannabis production in Portugal. We're not going to end there, but this is what the near term looks like. I can tell you I'm not known as a promoter, and I guess at the very beginning when I started working with Johan was this. He says, "You're not a very good client of mine." And I go, "Why?" He goes, "You don't promote." He says, "You have a different business model. You're putting your head down." Even though we've been working together since about September, is that right? About September. He said, "We're going to build a history with RavenQuest. We're going to show you that you're doing all the right things." But I refused to promote. I said I wanted to build a company that had revenues, had profits, was fully built, and it wasn't a three-dimensional rendering of funded capacity, which many companies in Canada are. You know that if you took a look at our 11,000 kilos and you took at 161 licensed producer in Canada, that 11,000 kilos puts us at about ranking of a number 10 to 15 in total cultivation. Many companies, not all, are built off of renderings and have not been able to get their cannabis production up. So it becomes very interesting is that because I am a consultant, I'm actually requested and I'm seen as an expert, not only in Canada, but even to Jeffries in London. I provide advice. Why? I'm extremely pragmatic. I've seen the good, I've seen the bad, and I've seen the ugly. And I've had an opportunity to talk very pragmatically about the concerns for investors that want to invest into the cannabis space. So Bloomberg, every 4 to 6 weeks, I'm out there taking anywhere from a 12 to a 14-minute segment. They give me much more time than probably I should ever get, but we always have a good discussion. But all the main media that cover ask me for comment if there's something changing or something different in the space. We're here today largely because I felt that it put the company now in a position that we can start bringing awareness to the investor community about where we are today. I'm guilty of one thing. I actually do what I say I'm going to do. And with that, Johan and I started talking about putting this together in February and March. I told him that if we started to schedule this stuff in advance, I would deliver everything that I'm talking to you today and would not miss a single point in what we needed to talk about the company. So we're at that inflection point today. What does that inflection point look like? We're about 120 million shares that are out. We're at about a 55, 60 cent share offering. Market cap, about $70 million. But I also want to give you assurances. The insiders of the company, the board and myself, we own about 14.7, 14.8% of the company. The largest shareholder is talking to you right now, about 7.88%. My lovely wife is out enjoying Frankfurt today, walking around the streets, trying to pick up some sights. She is the other part of that 7.8%. We put everything into this company. But more importantly, what we did, we decided to give confidence to anyone in the industry and who wanted to invest. We escrowed all of our shares for 3 years. This space has been filled with some people who build a company up, spin it, and sell it out. I didn't want to give that impression to anyone who was interested in making an investment into RavenQuest. I wanted them to know that I was going to be here for the long term and that I was willing to put all of my pieces of the pie in and let it sit there for 3 years. If we continue to take a look at what that means as some comparables in the industry, remember in Canada, there's 161. I couldn't list them all. There's no way. You'd need a magnifying glass and you'd have to stand up close to the screen to see them. But this is a whole wide variety of the companies that are there, from the big ones to the ones that are actually smaller than us. Some of those companies that are listed up there don't even grow half the amount of cannabis that we can grow. That number of 1.34 times the enterprise value based on 2019 revenues, which looks to be somewhere between $50 and $60 million, puts us at about a 1.34 times multiplier. The reality of that has nothing to do with the performance of the company. I have just never been a promoter or going to talk about the company until now. Many of those other companies have spent millions of dollars on promotions, but today we're well positioned to say to you, we're creating revenue, we've sold our product in advance, we have revenues, and we're actually creating profit as we speak right now. If you want to take a look, you could actually look at the US comparables if you're out there. We've just picked a few that are there. The same issue exists. But today you have an opportunity to buy into a company that's going to have rapid growth on the share price. But more importantly, we're going to deliver not a hope, not a prayer, but real numbers and real revenue to you. If you start taking a look at the out years, next year, without bringing in any of the numbers from Europe, we're about a $70 to $90 million business in our top line revenues. We had to go through our year-end financials, and we have to supply a 5-year plan for those. Our third-party auditors in Canada, IFRS auditors, provided us guidance on what we should say our EBITDA is. It looks like to be, from their sign-off, 38 to 42%. This is an extremely profitable business. Because our costs are so low, roughly in about $1.25 a gram fully packaged, our contracts are from $5.50 a gram to $7.99 a gram. These are all Canadian dollars. This is where we see the future, and this is where we're planning to have our revenue streams. But the difference is between what you sell it for and what you can actually cultivate it and package it for. We feel very strongly, because of our ES&G program, what you've seen is less power, less water, less nutrients, creating a very stable plant material that can be used in any type of delivery methods out there. You know that you can have the fresh squeezed orange juice of cannabis in your portfolio. We believe very strongly that we're ready to see this number move up. Matthew McDonald leads all of our corporate communications for us. He's listed there. I want to thank you today for taking time, your precious time. It's one thing we can never ask back for is time, can we? But you decided to take a few minutes to come out and see us today. I truly appreciate you having your time and your attention and coming down here to see us today. Thank you from behalf of RavenQuest.